5 Network. This is OpenLine.
Hello everyone, welcome to OpenLine. Talking all about the Metro Council tonight. I have two people here with us who can help us do that. Happy to have them here. Vice Mayor Jim Shulman. Vice Mayor, thank you for being here.
Sure, glad to be here.
Also the Director of the Metro Council, Mike Jamison. Mike, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, thank you.
All right, there's a lot to talk about. Council meeting last night, and you're new as Vice Mayor. How has it been? How has it been going for you as Vice Mayor at this point?
So a lot of it was just getting used to trying to figure out how to, officially run the meetings. You're coming in 3/4 of the way through a council term, so you kind of just pick up right where both Vice Mayor Briley and Sherry Weiner, who was our pro tem, who was acting Vice Mayor, left it. So you just pick up and start moving it. I think the idea was to kind of try some different things. We've started reading a civility statement into the record before we start. We've named some non-standing committees, like an innovations committee, to kind of look at some new things going on. And the rest of it was just kind of getting the feel and the flow for the meeting. Every meeting's different. You never know exactly. You think you know what are going to be the issues, but sometimes they'll surprise you. What
do you think would make a successful Vice Mayor? So how would you judge, okay, this meeting, it was successful, and even beyond that, your first year in office?
Okay. Well, so every meeting, again, is different. I think the way I would judge a successful meeting would be if basically it just flows. So there's not glitches, there's, the votes are taken properly, people don't get confused. Part of this, and if you watch the council meeting, and I know some of your viewers do, sometimes you'll hear me go back over the bill numbers, the resolution numbers, and sometimes I will actually explain, particularly for the people who might be in the back during a public hearing, exactly how the process is working so that everybody knows exactly where we are. So at the end of the meeting, I think it's a good meeting when you feel like, okay, everybody knew what we were doing, everybody stayed with it. There was not confusion over what, whether we might have an amendment or whether there was a previous question call or whatever. That everybody stayed with it, everybody knew exactly where we were, and in the end, everybody was comfortable. Sometimes some of the decisions are tough, right, but everybody knew what they were voting on.
Everybody had a chance to speak and all of that.
Right.
Mike Jamison, as Director of the Council, just explain briefly, what does that mean and what's your role?
So under the charter, the council has a director, an executive director, who also serves essentially special counsel, prepares their legislation, provides legal advice, but also runs the council staff that serves the council mostly for constituent service needs.
And one of the many things I want to talk about tonight, the Community Oversight Board. So the Community Oversight Board was passed by the voters, a fairly large margin, and it's up to the council to implement it. Is that right? And where are we in that process, in implementing the Community Oversight Board? And either one of you can take that.
Well, so, the charter amendment passes, and if you read the language of the charter amendment, the first steps that have to be taken is to select or elect an 11-member board. And we have to do that by January 31st. So we have less than 2 months to get that done. And so there's a lot of procedures involved with that. You have to, first of all, notify people that the nomination process is open, and then you have to get the nomination petitions ready. People have to get them, then the nominations have to be in by a certain time. Once we get the nominations in, the questionnaire has to go out, the questionnaire has to come back in. We have to call all those individuals in. They have to be vetted by our rules committee, the council rules committee, and then we have to select and elect 11 members, 7 from community organizations, 2 from the council, and 2 from the mayor's office. And we have to have that done by January 31st. And it's a fairly complicated procedure. It may depend on how many nominations we get. And one of the reasons I'm glad that Mike's here is that he can talk it through. I mean, this is charter amendment just passed.
Right.
Passed in November.
Right.
the council meetings are going on, and we are trying to get the word out. So we're really glad that we're here, because community organizations can nominate. You can self-nominate. Again, the council can nominate. The mayor's office picks 2 as well. They all have to be elected by the council. And we have to move on this fairly quickly. And the other thing I'll say is that we have to follow exactly what the charter amendment says. And I think Mike can probably pick up on that, because there's some things that are not necessarily defined in that, which open it up a little bit more than maybe we're used to. So we're trying to follow the exact language of the charter very quickly and make sure we do this right.
I believe we had someone on the show, maybe it was right before Thanksgiving, who said there were not many people who had applied yet to be on the Community Oversight Board. Now again, it had just passed in earlier November. This would have been late November. Where are we now? How many people have applied, and is there a deadline? I mean, you hear this list of things that has to be done. Is there a deadline in each phase of that process?
So yesterday morning we had 7 confirmed. By the end of the day, as announced at the council meeting by the vice mayor, we had 23 that had applied. So pretty exponential increase during the course of the day, and I expect that will continue. The nomination deadline is December 18th at 4:30 p.m. to the clerk's office. That applies to all parties, to the community organizations, to the petitioners, to the council members, and the mayor.
And if so, there are community organizations that can nominate a person, and an individual. You said an individual can nominate himself or herself. Is that right?
With a petition.
With a petition.
What's the process there? What would somebody do?
There's a petition form that's available now online on the Metro Council website. Top right corner, you'll see a link that includes all of the available forms, including the nomination form. The charter language is an individual can be nominated by a petition signed by 50 Davidson County residents.
So if you go out and get 50 signatures, do they have to be registered voters, or is it just residents of Davidson County?
It is just residents.
So you get 50 signatures from residents, then you're nominating yourself essentially to be considered. And then what happens? So you now have 23, so we went from 7, you have a significant number, a decent number already. There are 11 slots.
Right.
Let's say you get a bunch. What happens at that point? Does the council go over them? Do you go over them? What happens next?
So I'll start, and then maybe Mike might want to finish. So let's say that we get, let's just pick a number. Let's say we get 50 nominations. They're coming in different forms. Community organization may nominate. Again, you may get a nomination petition. And then you're also getting them from the council, and then you're getting them from the mayor's office. So once they come in, a questionnaire goes out to everyone to fill out. And we're still working on that questionnaire. But pursuant to our plan, or the kind of the policy that the council adopted, or that we've relayed to the council, as soon as the petitions come in on the 18th, we're going to have a questionnaire that goes out on the 19th. They have to get that in by, I think it's Friday, January the 4th. If you don't get that petition in, then you don't qualify to be considered. After that, there are certain parameters that there are some things in that charter amendment. You can't be with law enforcement, currently a law enforcement officer. You also can't be an elected official. You can't be a spouse of those two either. So we'll make sure that we check that. You get your questionnaire in, and then it goes to the Rules Committee, where you will be vetted. And vetted is, you know, they're going to ask a series of questions. But again, we have to follow what's in that charter amendment. So as long as you don't run into the parameters question, which is, you know, a law enforcement officer or an elected official, we want to know what you're interested in, why you want to do this. But there's not a lot of things to actually kick people out. We just got to make sure that we vet everybody, and then it turns over to the council for a vote.
It's very interesting. You're coming up with the questionnaire right now. Does the charter amendment give you guidance in what should be asked in that questionnaire, and how specific can you tell me right now? You know, what will you ask? What are you looking for in that questionnaire? I'll ask you that, Mike.
We have a standard form that we have used for years for all board and commission nominees. So we started with that. We have some specific criteria set out in the charter amendment. For example, the vice mayor was mentioning that per the charter amendment language, you cannot be a member of law enforcement. So we have to ask that question. You cannot be a spouse of such individual. We have to ask that question. From that point, the vice mayor, true to his nature, reached out to the community at large and said, we want your input on how best to proceed with this process, including questionnaire questions. And we got suggestions. It's a fascinating process to see our rules committee considering those questions now. And what I mean by that is one of the proposed questions essentially asked if you've had an arrest record or a criminal background. And some council members saw that and were concerned that that was trying to exclude an element that may have had a run-in with the law. And do we necessarily want to completely exclude that factor? What's interesting is that that question had been submitted by what I would call an advocacy group for the amendment. They wanted that question asked. I suspect for one of two reasons. Either one, they would like somebody on that board who's had that perspective, who's had a run-in with the law, perhaps. And it was intended as a friendly question to draw out a positive recommendation factor, not a negative, but it's interesting how that question is perceived.
I could see this as being a very interesting discussion. Would you know their criminal histories? Is that something that people on the board, any board, do you generally find out their criminal histories?
The Metropolitan Human Resources Department will typically do criminal background checks for Metro hired employees, particularly directors of departments and on down. Not typically for a board like this. But we are cognizant of the fact that for a board like this, nothing could be more sensitive than finding out someone who's just been nominated and perhaps approved by the council is wanted in 7 states, so to speak.
Right.
So whether or not the question gets asked, the Rules Committee will continue to work on and make a decision by the 18th.
And as Vice Mayor, what are you hoping? I don't know that you can direct the Rules Committee, but what would you say to someone on the Rules Committee who says, I don't know, what guidance would you give them, I guess, as Vice Mayor?
So again, we want to follow what's in the charter amendment, so you have to follow that. But then when you said interesting, this is an interesting process because we haven't been through one quite like this. We want, this is very, very, very important. A lot of eyes, a lot of attention on this. So we want everybody to be very careful as they look through the questionnaire. We don't want to overstep and ask something that really shouldn't be on there, shouldn't be relevant. But we do want to ask relevant questions because in the end, the council is going to have to vote on these people. And so you want to have enough information without violating any of the charter provisions. You want to have enough information so you can select or elect a very good group of people.
Is there another step after this? So you get the questionnaire, as you said, you're picking a number out of the air, 50 people nominate or nominated, 45 of them fill out the questionnaire. Do you have a step then where you can interview them? Does the council ask them questions face to face?
So let's say that we get 45 people who have turned in a questionnaire. Okay, so typically in a council meeting, if we have 5 people interested in 2 slots of something, we can handle that in a regular committee meeting and a full council meeting. We may have to have special meetings for this. If we get 50 nominations and 50 questionnaires, if you're going to take the time, if the Rules Committee is going to take its time, and my guess would be the Rules Committee would meet and we would invite the rest of the council. Again, we know that people are watching this. This was, highly understood, highly watched amendment on the charter ballot in terms of the charter amendment. So we know a lot of people are watching this. We know this is very important. I think the council members understand that this is very important. A lot of people, again, watching how we're doing this. So again, the Rules Committee is going to have to go through there and ask a lot of questions. Let's say there are 50 people. They may want to ask the same questions to everybody, and they may want to thoroughly review what the questionnaire says. We want other council members to be watching this as well, because once we get through, and again, there are not a lot of parameters in that charter amendment that says, you know what, you can't be considered. As long as you meet the basic requirements, you can be vetted through. It then goes to the council for a vote, and that's a whole process in itself. Mike can explain, or I can explain it. If we got, we have to take the folks that were either nominated by the community organizations or self-nominated first. That's how we're going to do it, because 7 of the 11 come from that group. Of that group, 4 have to reside in economically distressed communities. As Mr. Jameson can tell you, that's not defined. So there is a way to try to look at that, but it's not defined in the charter amendment. So of the first group that we're going to vote on, the first group will have to be from the 4, we'll have to pick 4 from those economically distressed communities.
You asked Ben about what would make a good member of the board, and that's for the council as a whole to decide. But we're all getting calls. You know, how do I apply? Would you recommend this? Councilman Shulman served as a council member, district and at large, and I know he's had this experience. You get calls from aspiring council members that are attracted to what the council is reported as doing on the front page of the paper when they're handling the larger, sexier issues. And it looks fascinating when you're deciding, is there going to be a sports franchise here? Is there going to be a major, convention center here, or whatever large issue of the day? But what you find yourself wanting to make sure that they understand is that it's mostly smaller issues, and you have to have an appetite for tedium and process. And I say that to say what I am saying to anyone who has called me about a position on this board is right now it does look high profile. It does look sexy, if you will. We've had 2 high profile incidents that arguably gave rise to this, and I think many people may have the impression that they are going to be presiding over hot topic, top of the fold newspaper issues every day. In contacting the legal departments in Memphis and Knoxville months ago on their experience with oversight boards, their #1 problem is attendance, because the day-to-day problems are not shootings. They are, the officer was rude to me at this traffic stop. And if you do not have an appetite for that sort of day-to-day, arguably mundane procedural process, this board is probably not for you.
And so you need to make sure you hire people for this board, or appoint people on this board who have an appetite for the day-to-day sort of tedium. You want them to show up. That would be a goal.
Well, again, as I said, this is very important. I mean, this is a new step for the city, and other cities have it around the country. You got Memphis and Knoxville that have some type of community oversight board. This is, to me, a very important thing for the city, a very big deal. So obviously one of the things that you want are people who understand the nature of this. I think Mr. Jameson is correct. We've had people who have called and said they're just going to investigate shootings. They're not investigating anything else. It's like, no. Allegations of misconduct, it could be anything. So there is a, it's not going to be, everything is not going to be so high profile. It's a matter of what comes before that board to review. That's what they're going to look at. And we certainly want people who are engaged, who want to do this, who are fair, are going to understand their role in this, and are going to show up.
All right, we've talked about, we have a lot of things to talk about. I wanted to ask you about several things that were voted on last night at the council meeting, but we're going to take a break, and then I'm going to continue this discussion because I'm fascinated by how are we going to define what is an economically distressed area. And so we'll go to break, and I'll let, I'm going to come back to you, Mike, with that question. All right, we'll go to break, be back right after this.